Okay, picture this. It's the default setting for practically every movie set in the Middle Ages.
Right.
You've got a dark, stormy night, a cold stone dungeon, and in the corner there's a monk, usually looking very grim, face hidden by a hood, scribbling furiously, while a woman is dragged toward a rack.
It's the classic image, isn't it? The witch hunt.
Exactly. Think The Name of the Rose or pretty much any horror movie set before 1700.
It is a very powerful image. It's atmospheric, it's terrifying, and it gives us a clear historical villain, the fanatical Catholic Inquisition crushing the superstitious peasantry.
Right. It's just one of those things we all kind of accept as history.
Yeah.
But the sources you've brought in today, I've been looking through them, and they seem to completely dismantle this.
They really do.
In fact, if I'm reading this right, they suggest that if you were accused of being a witch in the early modern period, the safest place to be was actually in front of a Catholic inquisitor.
It sounds completely counterintuitive, doesn't it? We are trained to think of the Inquisition as the bad guys. But when you actually look at the trial records, the legal codes, the academic research, the reality is almost the exact opposite of pop culture.
So we're saying the Inquisition wasn't the engine behind the witch hunts.
Not only were they not the engine, but in many key places, the Inquisition was often the only thing standing between an accused person and a lynch mob.
Wow.
The Great Witch Hunt wasn't really a medieval event, and the church hierarchy was often the entity trying to stop the trials, not start them.
Okay, my brain is already doing a little flip here.
Hmm?
Welcome to the deep dive, everyone. Today we are tackling the myth of the burning monk. We're going to find out who really hunted the witches.
And a little fair warning, the answer involves a lot less religion and a lot more, well, bureaucracy and bad legal theory than you might expect.
That is a great way to put it. So
Well,
where do we start?
Well, to really understand this, we have to look at three key pieces of the puzzle. First, we need to distinguish between the different inquisitions because they weren't all the same.
Okay.
Then we need to meet let's call him a disgruntled marketing genius named Heinrich Kramer. And finally, we have to look at a terrifying legal loophole in the secular courts that essentially turn the law into a murder machine.
Let's start with the timeline, because I think that's the first hurdle. I always assumed witch burning was a medieval thing. You know, knights, castles, witches.
That is the first big misconception. The Great Witch Hunt is not a medieval phenomenon. It's an early modern one. We're talking roughly the 15th to the 18th centuries.
15th to 18th.
Yeah, and the absolute peak of the burnings was actually around the time of the 30 Years' War in the 1600s.
Wait, the 1600s? So while Galileo was figuring out the solar system and Descartes was writing philosophy?
Courts in Central Europe were burning thousands of people. It's a paradox of the so-called Age of Reason.
That's incredible.
And notice I said courts, not just church courts. One of the most important takeaways from our sources is that the vast majority of these trials were conducted by secular authorities, civil town councils, local lords, and state judges.
But the Inquisition was still involved, right? I mean, they are literally famous for this. If you say Inquisition, the next word in my head is witch.
They were involved, but the Inquisition wasn't a monolith. It wasn't one big, continuous monster. It's better to think of them as three very different institutions.
Right.
You have the medieval Inquisition, the Spanish Inquisition, and the Roman Inquisition, and their attitudes toward witches were, for the most part, surprisingly skeptical.
Okay, let's break those down. Walk us through the medieval one first. If I went to a medieval inquisitor in the 13th century and confessed to flying on a broom, what happens to me? Do I get the stake?
You might be surprised. In the 13th century, the official church doctrine, based on a really important text called the Canon Episcopi, was that witchcraft was a delusion.
A delusion, like they didn't believe it was real.
It's a subtle point. They believed the devil was real, of course. But the Canon Episcopi argued that women who claimed to fly at night with the goddess Diana or on beasts were, well, they were suffering from hallucinations sent by the devil.
So they thought these women were crazy, not evil.
In a sense, yes. The heresy wasn't being a witch. The heresy was believing you had that kind of power. It meant you had abandoned your faith in God's supremacy to believe in some pagan fantasy.
So if the crime is believing a fantasy, what's the punishment? A stern talking to.
Usually it was penance, a stern lecture. Maybe you'd have to fast for a while. They treated it more like a superstition to be corrected than a capital crime.
So no burning.
No, he'd probably tell you to go get some sleep and stop listening to old wives' tales.
That is wild.
Yeah.
Okay, but what about the Spanish Inquisition? They have the worst reputation of all. If we're talking villains, they're usually number one on the list.
They do have a terrible reputation, and it's deserved in many ways, mostly because of their brutal pursuit of Jewish and Muslim converts, the conversos and Moriscos. They were obsessed with lineage and purity of blood,
Right.
but when it came to witches, they were incredibly skeptical.
Really? Even with their reputation for being so ruthless.
There's a fascinating case study in the notes here. In 1610, there was a massive witch panic in the Basque country in Navarre. The locals were terrified. Accusations were flying everywhere.
The perfect storm.
Absolutely. So the Spanish Inquisition sent an inquisitor named Alonso de Salazar y Frias to investigate.
And what did he find? Did he start lighting the fires?
He did the opposite. He acted like a modern detective. He interviewed thousands of people. He cross-referenced their stories. He looked for physical evidence. And in the end, he concluded that the whole thing was mass hysteria.
He debunked it.
Completely. He wrote this incredible report saying, and I'm paraphrasing a little, there were no witches and no bewitched until we started talking and writing about them.
Wow. Until we started talking about them. He realized the investigation itself was creating the crime.
Exactly. He realized that by asking leading questions, the courts were just planting ideas in people's heads. Because of his report, the Spanish Inquisition effectively put a brake on witch burning in Spain.
So while the rest of Europe is heating up, Spain is actually cooling down.
For this specific issue, yes. And the same goes for the Roman Inquisition in Italy. In the Papal States, the land ruled directly by the Pope. Executions for witchcraft were in the single digits. Over centuries.
Single digits, that's it.
It's a statistical outlier compared to the North. The Pope even decreed at one point that in cases of suspected witchcraft, they should call a doctor, not an executioner. They viewed it as a medical issue.
So if the church policy was largely, witches are deluded, send them to a doctor, or ignore the superstitions, how on earth do we get to the mass burnings? How do we get from, it's a delusion, to burn them all?
We get there because of one, let's say, disgruntled employee. A Dominican friar named Heinrich Kramer. And frankly, he's the closest thing this story has to a traditional movie villain.
The name sounds familiar. Kramer.
He's the man who changed everything. In the late 15th century, Kramer was an inquisitor, but he was an extremist even for his time. He was obsessed with the idea that witches were a real physical threat, and specifically that they were women having sexual relations with the devil.
The notes mentioned he had a bit of a disaster in Innsbruck in 1485. What happened there?
Disaster is putting it mildly. Kramer went to Innsbruck to prosecute a group of women, but during the trial, he didn't focus on theology. He just focused on all these sordid sexual details. He kept asking the women about their bodies, really graphic stuff.
And how did the court react to that?
The local bishop, a man named Georg Golser, was disgusted. He thought Kramer was a creep. He personally intervened in the trial.
The bishop defended the accused women.
He defended the legal process and basic decency. He actually called Kramer a senile old man in his private letters. He threw out the case, annulled the sentences, and essentially kicked Kramer out of the city, told him to leave and never come back.
That is amazing. He got fired for being too extreme by the Inquisition standard.
He did. But Kramer wasn't the type to just go quietly. He was humiliated. He was furious. He wanted revenge. So he decided to write a book to prove that he was right, and the bishop and the rest of the skeptical church was wrong.
And let me guess, that book is the famous one.
Yes. The Malleus Maleficarum, The Hammer of Witches, published in 1486.
I've seen pictures of this book. It looks incredibly official. It usually has a papal bull right at the beginning. That seems like a pretty solid endorsement to me.
And that was Kramer's genius. The book was a masterpiece of marketing and, frankly, deception. He needed credibility after being thrown out of Innsbruck, so he secured a papal bull from Pope Innocent VIII.
Which said, Kramer is right and you should listen to him.
No, that's the trick. The bull was generic. It basically just said, yes, witches exist and inquisitors are allowed to do their jobs. It didn't endorse Kramer's specific crazy theories about demon lovers and stealing men's anatomy.
But Kramer just pasted this generic permission slip at the very front of his book.
Exactly. It makes it look like the Pope signed off on his manifesto.
It's like putting a blurry photo of a celebrity on a product to make it look like they use it.
Perfect analogy. And he went further. He claimed the theologians at the prestigious University of Cologne had approved the book.
Did they?
No. They actually condemned it. They said it was unethical and illegal. But Kramer forged a recommendation and printed it in the book anyway.
So the whole foundation of the Witch Hunter's Bible is a lie. A forgery.
It is a forgery and a manipulation. But here's the problem. The printing press had just been invented. Before this, if a guy had a crazy idea, it stayed in his village. Now Kramer's book could be mass-produced.
And that bypasses the church hierarchy.
Precisely. The bishops and the theologians hated the book, but the secular judges, the town magistrates in small German villages, they didn't know the University of Cologne had condemned it. They just saw a book that looked official, had a pope's letter in the front, and gave them a step-by-step guide on how to spot a witch.
It shifted the entire narrative.
Completely. It moved the needle from witches are deluded people to witches are a secret army of Satan trying to destroy your town. And it gave secular courts the confidence to act.
This brings us to the part that I find the most chilling. The secular courts, the civil government, were the ones doing the actual killing. Why were they so much more lethal than the religious courts?
It all comes down to the legal machinery. There's a German term that keeps popping up in the sources. Peinliche Befragung.
My German is a little rusty. Peinliche usually means embarrassing, right? But pain means pain, so...
A painful questioning.
Exactly. It's the bureaucratic euphemism for torture. Now, this is where it gets really tragic. In 1532, the Holy Roman Empire tried to fix the legal system. They released a legal code called the Carolina, and the Carolina was supposed to help.
It was an attempt at due process. It tried to regulate torture. It said you couldn't just grab someone and rack them because a neighbor didn't like them. You needed indicia, hard evidence, before you could even threaten torture.
That sounds like progress. That sounds like modern law.
It would have been. But it contained a fatal loophole. It had a clause that allowed local custom to take precedence over the imperial code.
Oh, no.
And in the fragmented German states, local custom meant the local lord or the town council could pretty much do whatever they wanted. They ignored the safeguards in the Carolina.
So the centralized law said stop, but the local courts just said we've always done it this way.
And this way involved what historians call torture inflation. In the secular courts, they operated on a panic model. If they caught one witch, they assumed she was part of a huge conspiracy, a coven.
So they didn't just want a confession for her crime. They wanted names.
They needed names. If you torture someone, eventually they will break. But to stop the pain, they won't just confess. They will name accomplices. Who else was at the Sabbath?
And the person under torture just spouts out whatever names come to mind. Neighbors, friends.
Anyone. I saw the baker, I saw the miller's wife, I saw the school teacher. So now the court arrests those 3 people.
And they torture them.
And they torture them until they each name 3 more people. It creates a geometric progression of suspects. 1 becomes 3, 3 becomes 9, 9 becomes 27.
It's a chain reaction.
Yeah.
A judicial pyramid scheme?
It's a nuclear reaction of judicial murder. This is why you see these massive super hunts in secular Germany, places like Bamberg or Würzburg, where hundreds of people were burned in just a few years.
And that kind of thing didn't happen under the Inquisition.
It was incredibly rare because they had stricter rules of evidence. They didn't usually force people to name accomplices under torture in the same way, and they generally threw out what was called spectral evidence.
Spectral evidence, you mean like ghosts?
Sort of. It was testimony that someone saw the accused spirit in a dream or at a witch's Sabbath. I dreamt she was there.
And that was enough to get you arrested.
In a secular court during a panic, yes. The Roman Inquisition generally threw that out. They wanted tangible proof. They also required defense attorneys for the accused, which was practically unheard of in these local secular trials.
It creates this terrifying picture of an unstoppable machine. Once the accusation is made in one of these secular courts, the torture guarantees a confession, and the confession guarantees more accusations. It feels hopeless.
It was hopeless, and you have to remember the context. This was the Little Ice Age. Crops were failing, there was famine, people were terrified and hungry. They wanted someone to blame for the bad weather, and the witch was the perfect scapegoat.
Did anyone inside the system realize it was broken? I mean, if you're a judge or a priest watching this, surely you see that it's just a meat grinder.
There were voices of reason, but one stands out above all the others. A Jesuit priest named Friedrich Spee von Langenfeld.
A Jesuit. So a man of the church again.
Yes. Spee had the grimmest job imaginable. He was a confessor in Würzburg during the height of the burning. His job was to sit with the condemned in their cells right before they were led out to the stake.
So he heard their final words when they have no reason left to lie?
Exactly. And he listened to them.
Yeah.
And he realized that every single person he walked to the fire was innocent. He famously said his hair turned prematurely white from the sheer horror of what he was witnessing.
But what could he do? If he spoke up, wouldn't they just accuse him?
That was the danger. If he said witches aren't real, he'd be burned as a heretic. So he had to be smart. He decided to attack the legal process, not the theology.
How do you do that?
In 1631, he anonymously published a book called Caudio Criminalis. It was a legal argument. He identified what he called the torture trap.
The torture trap?
He argued that under the current system of the peinliche Befragung, no one innocent or guilty could possibly escape conviction. He wrote famously, "If you torture me enough, I will confess to killing the Pope."
That is such a powerful statement. He's showing that the confession is worthless because it's just a product of the pain.
Exactly. He demonstrated that the secular courts weren't finding truth, they were manufacturing guilt. He famously challenged the judges, "Find me one single person who can endure the torture without confessing, and I will believe you."
And of course, they couldn't.
They couldn't. His work, along with others, slowly started to turn the tide. They convinced the German princes that they were depopulating their own territories and killing innocent subjects for nothing.
It's incredible that it took a whistleblower from inside the church to stop the machinery that the secular courts had ramped up.
It really forces us to rethink the entire narrative.
So if we zoom out and look at the big picture here, the story isn't the evil church hunted witches.
No. The story is much more complex and, I think, much more frightening. It's a tragedy of secular anxiety. It was fueled by economic crisis, famine, the cold weather of the Little Ice Age, and a legal system that had discarded its safeguards in the name of an emergency.
And the church.
The church certainly has its own very dark history with heresy. We can't forget that. But when it came to the specific craze of the witch hunt, the centralized inquisitions, in Rome and Spain especially, actually acted as a brake on the madness. They were bureaucratic, they were skeptical, and they were obsessed with rules.
It really flips the script. We usually think of secular as rational and religious as superstitious. But here, the religious institution was the one demanding evidence, and the secular courts were running on fear and superstition.
It brings us to a very relevant point for today, I think. It shows how dangerous any institution can become when due process is bypassed because of fear. When people feel there's an existential threat, whether it's a plague, a famine, or a witch, they are willing to suspend the rules to find a scapegoat.
This has been a fascinating look into a very misunderstood part of history. It's not just about monks and dungeons. It's about law, fear, and the power of a bad idea when it goes viral.
Absolutely, and I think it leaves us with a provocative thought to end on.
What's that?
If the evil Inquisition, the villain of so many movies and books, was actually the institution stopping witch trials in Rome and Spain, what other historical villains might we have completely wrong? And maybe more importantly, what modern common knowledge about justice might be just as wrong as the Hollywood version of the witch hunts?
That is definitely something to sit with. It makes you want to go double-check everything you think you know. Thanks for diving deep with us today.
A pleasure as always.
See you next time on The Deep Dive.